What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you'll consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about Game of Thrones and why the ending of the series made absolutely no sense and what the writers should have done instead. And in case it's not obvious, this video will contain spoilers, so if for some reason you've been living under the rock for the last decade or so and you haven't seen this show yet and you're not trying to hear about anything that happens in it, you might want to exit this video right now. And with that being said, no more wasting time, let's get into it. Game of Thrones is an American fantasy drama television series created by David Benioff and Dan B. Weiss for HBO. It's an adaptation of George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire book series. And the show was shot in the United Kingdom, Canada, Croatia, Iceland, Malta, Morocco, and Spain. It premiered on HBO in the United States on April 17th of 2011, and the show concluded on May 19th of 2019, with 73 episodes broadcast in total over the show's 8 seasons. Set on the fictional continents of Westeros and Essos, Game of Thrones has a large ensemble cast and follows several story arcs throughout the course of the show. The first major arc concerns the Iron Throne of the Seven Kingdoms of Westeros through a web of political conflicts among the noble families either vying to claim the throne or fighting for independence from whoever sits upon it. The second focuses on the last descendant of the realm's deposed ruling dynasty who has been exiled to Essos and is plotting to return and reclaim the throne. And the third follows the Night's Watch, a military order defending the realm against threat from beyond Westeros' northern border. Game of Thrones attracted record viewership on HBO and has a broad, active, and international fan base. Critics have praised the series for its acting, complex characters, story, scope, and production value, although its frequent use of nudity and violence has been subject to criticism over the years. The final season received significant critical backlash for its reduced length and the creative decisions, with many considering the show to have a disappointing conclusion. Nevertheless, the series received 59 Primetime Emmy Awards, the most of any drama series ever, including Outstanding Drama Series in 2015, 2016, 2018, and 2019. Its other awards and nominations include 3 Hugo Awards for Best Dramatic Presentation, a Peabody Award, and 5 nominations for the Golden Globe Award for Best Television Series in the category of Drama. Now, at the time of the making of this video, the show currently has an 89% rating on Rotten Tomatoes with a comparable audience score of 85%. It has a Metascore of 86 based on 171 critic reviews on Metacritic with a user score of 8.4, and that's based on almost 19,000 user ratings. And it has an impressive 9.2 out of 10 on IMDb, and that's based on over 2 million reviews. So, I'm sure whether you watch this show or not, you probably know that Game of Thrones is one of the most watched television shows in history. I'm also sure if you did watch this show at some point that we can agree that the ending of Game of Thrones was one of the most divisive endings to a television show in history, to the point where people are still talking about this show now, some at this point, almost 5 years after the show's series finale. The one thing that people seem to feel the most confused by was Daenerys Targaryen making the choice to burn King's Landing to the ground. But I will still contend that despite how people feel about it, that action was always going to occur. I mean, she had been saying since season 2, outside the gates of Qarth, that once her dragons were grown, she was going to burn cities and lay waste to armies. And I understand at first you may have thought she was just sticking out her chest in order to protect her sad little Khalasar at the time. But as time went on, we definitely all saw that Daenerys was a force to be reckoned with, and that she indeed lived up to the words of her house, fire and blood. So I'm not going to get into Daenerys destroying the capital in this particular video. Instead, I'm going to talk about what came after. Now, I take absolutely no issue with anything that happened in the series finale before Jon killed Daenerys, so I figure that's as good a place to start as any here. Now, if you recall, after Jon plunged his dagger into Dany's heart, or, side or whatever, Drogon shows up, because he feels the death of his mother. But once he does, he doesn't burn Jon alive, because of the whole Targaryen thing or whatever. But instead, he burns the Iron Throne itself. He literally melts the chair into nothing. And I don't know, to me, this is symbolic, or at least it should have been. The chair where the rulers of Westeros have sat since Aegon the Conqueror is now no more. Now, I want you to keep that in mind. Now, after Jon kills Daenerys, he's taken into custody by the Unsullied and held until all the great lords of Westeros show up in King's Landing for the Coke Social to decide what happens next. Once they arrive, Tyrion, who was also arrested for quitting his job as vice president, is brought out and he addresses the group to Grey Worm's dismay as he implores them to choose a new ruler. And this is where I have the first issue concerning the show's ending. Now, the group, including Tyrion, ends up choosing Bran as the new king. But this choice makes absolutely no sense for a few reasons. One, Bran has said on an occasion or two that he doesn't really remember what it's like to be human. And I think, personally, that if you're going to be king of humans, you should at the very least understand what it means to be human. Governing human beings with no understanding of human beings, to me, would be an absolute disaster. Secondly, it creates a problem for Bran's character from a narrative standpoint. If Bran is the three-eyed raven, meaning that he can see everything that has ever happened, everything that is currently happening, and everything that ever will happen, and then you make him king, that means that everything he ever did in manipulating people into the positions that they were in, some of whom died as a result, was done not in order to save the human race, but instead so that Bran could become king. And I don't know, that changes everything as it pertains to how we should view Bran's character where the story is concerned. So it is with this in mind that I completely reject the writer's choice to make Bran king, and here's what I think they should have done instead. I think the great lords of Westeros should have indeed come to King's Landing, just as they did in the series finale that we got, but instead of bringing Tyrion out to address them, I think Sansa, maybe with Arya and Bran's help, and with the backing of the Northern Army, should have negotiated with Grey Worm in order to secure Jon's release. And when Grey Worm undoubtedly rejected the idea of releasing Jon, Sansa should have then made it known that Jon wasn't simply the Warden of the North, but that he was also Aegon Targaryen, sixth of his name, King of the Andals and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm. The true King of Westeros. Which I think would have gone a long way to winning the other great lords to her side, especially Samwell Tarly, who would have already known all this. And I think that ultimately would have dampened Yara Greyjoy's resolve as it pertained to keeping Jon prisoner, or maybe getting rid of him altogether, which could have gone a long way in forcing Grey Worm to release Jon, whether he wanted to or not. I would imagine the Unsullied would not have wanted to fight another war against all of the great lords and houses of Westeros, especially since they had no plans to stay in Westeros. And when you also consider the fact that King's Landing could no longer really be defended because it had been reduced to rubble due to Daenerys' unfortunate choices, it feels to me like Jon's release would have been even more guaranteed. And after Sansa successfully secured Jon's release, she, along with Arya and Bran, would go and see Jon, giving him the good news that he was to be set free, before giving him the bad news that everyone now knows who he really is and that they've chosen him to be the new king of Westeros. At which point I would imagine Jon would say something along the lines of, "I don't want it. I never have." Now, at that point, Sansa would probably, scold him, claiming that he's skirting responsibility. But after the brief argument, I think Sansa would then ask Jon who he thinks should be king in his stead. And I think Jon would have simply answered, no one. Now, why do I think that? Keep in mind that the story of a united Westeros starts with Aegon the Conqueror landing his dragon at Blackwater Rush before conquering 6 of the 7 kingdoms, minus Dorne, in an effort to unite those kingdoms so that they might faced the threat from north of the wall together when the time came. Before that, though, the seven kingdoms each ruled themselves. So it would only make sense that, with King's Landing again reduced to ash, with the death of Daenerys, and with the refusal of Jon/Aegon to actually sit the Iron Throne, you know, the throne that no longer exists because Drogon melted the chair down to nothing, that the seven kingdoms would simply go back to ruling themselves, as they did before the Targaryens ever got involved in the politics of Westeros in the first place. When Bran was elected king, the first thing he did was to grant Sansa and the North their independence from the rest of the six kingdoms. But that made no narrative sense to me, because why would you do that for one of the seven kingdoms and not all of them? So, with that in mind, in my version of the series finale, Jon would declare that each of the seven kingdoms would be ruled by the lords of the great houses in said kingdoms. Jon would order Tyrion's release, because quitting your job as Hand of the Queen isn't really treason if the queen you served is dead, certainly by the hand of the dude who's now, de facto king, even if it's only for a few minutes. Tyrion would then return to Casterly Rock as its lord and rule over the Westerlands. Samwell Tarly would return to Horn Hill as its lord, where he would then rule over the Reach. Robin Arryn would, of course, be Lord of the Eyrie and rule over the Vale. My man Ed Muir Tully, bless his heart, the guy that spent half the series locked up. I felt bad for Ed Muir. He would be Lord of River Run, of course, and he would rule over the Riverlands. Random Prince of Dorne buddy would, of course, be Prince of Dorne. Gendry Baratheon would be Lord of Storm's End and rule over the Stormlands. Yara Greyjoy would, of course, still be Queen of the Iron Islands. And then Sansa Stark would rule at Winterfell as Queen in the North. Bran Stark would remain the three-eyed raven, and he would be Sansa's hand, operating out of Winterfell. Heart trees everywhere. Arya Stark would hop on a boat still and go find out what's west of Westeros. And Jon? Well, after he said his goodbyes to his cousins, he would simply take a horse and ride north, past Winterfell, all the way back to Castle Black, but not as a prisoner, simply as himself, where he would link up with Tormund and the rest of the wildlings who were waiting at Castle Black for the winter snows to pass. And once that happened, he would then catch out with Tormund and the wildlings north of the wall to a place where he could live out the rest of his days in peace. It never really made sense for Jon to be sent to the wall as a prisoner in the series finale that we actually got, especially with the Unsullied again leaving Westeros headed for Noth. Remember, the Night's Watch is no more. And even if, King Bran wanted to reboot the organization, there's no longer a need for them. The Night King's dead. All of the wildlings are in Castle Black, and even once they head back north, the wall has fallen at Eastwatch by the Sea, so anyone who wants to travel back and forth could kind of come and go as they please anyway. Now, make no mistake, even with the list of absolutely egregious mistakes that were made by the showrunners in seasons 7 and 8 of this series, I still believe Game of Thrones is the greatest fantasy drama ever made. That being said, I've also said on this channel before that I'll never watch anything that Dan Weiss and David Benioff write or direct again because they clearly don't understand how to tell a story. And that was truly disappointing in this case because they had most of the answers to the test here. George R.R. Martin, wrote most of the content that they used to make the TV show. But despite that fact, they failed at the part that matters most, the ending. I've always said that as a screenwriter, you have to land the plane, right? Nobody cares if the takeoff and the flight is as smooth as butter if you crash the plane, killing everybody on board 1,000 feet from the gate. And I always tell people that I believe that the beginning of your story tells the audience what the story will be about. But the ending of your story tells the audience why you wrote the story in the first place. Now, Dan and Dave gave us a what, and I think it was an absolute great what, even though, again, like I said, it was really given to us by way of George R.R. Martin. But when it came time, they didn't really give us a why or at least not one that was satisfactory. And because they failed to do that, they turned a show that had the potential to be one of the greatest stories told in my lifetime, and they made it into a show with one of the most disappointing endings in recent memory. But what do you guys think? Did the end of Game of Thrones make narrative sense to you? Or do you think that Dan and Dave botched the ending of the series like they botched so many other parts of season 7 and 8? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you who might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. Also, be sure to go check out themadscreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and upcoming info on my film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write. I'll catch you in the next video.